All right, everyone. Well, you were worried about Russian KGB agents and the Red Scare bullshit. Nepal actually just voted in a communist coalition, like legit communism. There are a couple parties there that represent basically, I guess, variants of communism, and they pulled together to form a coalition. And the weakness of their reigning sort of, liberal government that they voted in the wake of the earthquake there, that still, there are people in lots and lots of desperate situations in Nepal. They've won partially by capitalizing, pardon the pun, upon the misery of the population. Let me tell you this, though. Now that communists are in charge of the General Assembly of Nepal, they're not going to go quietly. Like when you get tired, when you realize that voting in a far left movement doesn't actually help the situation beyond the short term. Like short term, they'll free up resources, they'll subsidize things, they'll build some commie block apartments, they'll give people bread lines. And people will be like, well, at least I have a mouthful of food and a kind of dry, kind of warm place to sleep. It's better than it was before. And so they ingratiate themselves to the poor, who don't really, after all, want much other than that mouthful of bread and that sleeping bag. And they get into perpetual power by doing this and make those classes reliant upon, really, their policies. At some point, over successive administrations, the far-left regime tends to spend more and more in order to win over the votes of those same groups of people. At some point, there is a tipping point that comes, commensurate with the strength of the economy at the time, in which it's no longer capable of paying for that. It then either has to print more money to pay for its programs. We're doing this in our end-stage socialism right now. Hopefully we reverse course so we can save ourselves. It'd be painful, but it's better than the alternative. And it's not end-stage capitalism. There is no fully capitalistic nation in the world today. There are just nations that have kind of a functioning market, like in the U.S., like in parts of Europe, certainly a Canada or an Australia or something. Or the third world, where you don't have a strong central government. Instead, you have tribal warfare because there is no actual centrality at all. It's too loose. It's actually in the opposite direction. It's anarchism, basically. With communism, or hardline socialism, at some point they run out of money. Reagan fundamentally, despite being demented at the time, was right when he spoke of this. The communists then, they drive up debt, or they hyperinflate the currency, or a revolution begins and they get kicked out and the whole thing starts all over again. Often you have a death spiral that's intergenerational, like a Venezuela situation. Maybe some reformist movement comes in. The reformist movement, either there's a civil war, or they fail to make it better because now they don't even have the bread and the sleeping bags for the poor. When really, if you just had a market system and sweated it out and let it recover, you'd have a functioning economy, people would be better off. Another problem with Nepal is specifically its geography. It doesn't have coastline. It's sandwiched between two major powers. And it is not itself particularly powerful. Its economy is entirely reliant upon trade with China and India for the most part. Its airspace is completely surrounded by China and India, so therefore it can have issues. Also, we got to recognize that Nepal is basically not quite an industrial nation as well. A lot of its income is tourism related. Nepal, it's a scenic mountainous location. Bhutan is similar. A lot of tourist revenue coming in, a lot of local farming and things like that. It's a very rural situation for a lot of people outside the capital. Half the capital got leveled by the fucking earthquake. So what more need you know? This signals as well they're definitely going to be making friends with China, because for a long time Nepal was more like they wanted to straddle and be very neutral between India and China. It's like, we're the neutral party, leave us alone. Nobody would want our land anyway. We're landlocked, we're going to trade both of you. Please, give us some, computers. We'll give you some grain or something. It's basically what happened. But they're going to have to, India is now becoming more and more capitalistic. They're one of the few countries that's actually moving towards capitalism in the whole world, becoming more economically free. Now, socially, not necessarily. There's some xenophobic attacks there. There's some religious infighting, certainly among multiple groups. There's certainly a pollution problem. As far as business goes, though, China is slowly falling apart. Its growth is slowing down. India is going into hyperdrive. They're doing the right thing economically, which is, hey, capitalism actually works. We want more market, not less market. They still want interventionism, but there's less interventionism. It's healthier for the economy generally. Meanwhile, Nepal will look at that, and economically, it's not going to be able to side with India. Now, this is another reason why Trump's swing towards wining and dining India is like the greatest thing he's done so far. That and his tax plan, and simply being a mogul, basically Don the Don, which gives people consumer confidence. Those are economic. Swinging towards India and away from partnerships with China, and at least balancing those two out, gives us so much more leverage within the region. It really does. India's a rising star within Asia. It's a major power in that region of the world. It's becoming a major player on the world stage at large. It's going to become the next China is India. India is going to be the next China. And people will be worried, like, down the road, they're going to make the same mistake. This was what they did in Japan in the 80s, China in the 2000s, and in the 2020s, they're going to do it with India. Every time an Asian country, its population is growing, it's got a lot of growth going on, a lot of investment, and people from those nations start buying things up. When they see within, like, Japan in the 80s, like, well, growth won't continue forever. They start taking their wealth, diversifying, and buying, like, land in Australia or in the US. People were worried, oh, pretty soon the Japanese will own us. This was a big thing in the 80s. Do they own us now, or are they still the junior partner? They've got a good economy, they've got a fine military and diplomatic presence, but clearly they don't have the ability to do butt-fuck anything to the United States. That's what's going to happen as well with China, and it will happen with India. It's already happening a little bit with China. China buys up some factory in the US, everyone freaks out, oh, the Chinese are going to own us. No, it's because the Chinese investing class knows China's growth will stop. We will remain the superpower. They want a piece of the pie. They want to have something over here to anchor them in case the Chinese economy goes belly up. Well, the Indian investment class will begin doing the same thing. Trust me. By the 2020s, you'll be talking about India will be the next world's major power. India will supplant the US. Indian investors will buy up all of the United States land. And it'll never happen. In 2040, somebody else will be doing the same thing. Meanwhile, US investors will be buying up chunks of their economic capabilities too. As US investors own huge amounts of shares in Chinese factories. As far as Nepal, they don't really have that capability. Not as large, they're landlocked, not as many industrial resources, kind of reliant. But this signals they're going to lean towards China. Now that may change. The one saving grace might be if China begins to collapse. They may not be able to rely upon China to really safeguard their economic potential. They might have to swing back to India. That would require the abandonment of communism. I don't even think that the Indian government would want to work with them. They have their own commie problem. The Philippines have a commie problem. Malaysia has a commie problem. Indonesia has a commie problem. Thailand has a commie problem. Burma definitely has a commie problem. Yeah, there is actually still a red tide in the world today. It's just at low tide, but it's not in Russia. Russia is arguably becoming more capitalistic than the United States and Western Europe, and in some measures less censored, oddly enough. You know, more press censorship, certainly, but certainly less of the domestic population on most counts. For instance, in Russia, you don't generally get jailed or fined or kicked off of a Russian platform for being mildly offensive, like you will by Twitter come the 18th, roughly. They're going to be purging people. It is coming. They're probably going to purge people that have nothing in common with ethno-nationalism. So I fear for the people of Nepal. You're about to go through some even shittier times. Like, you'll recover temporarily. You're going to run the economy that'll be running on fumes, because communists like to take, you know, everything productive and just sort of funnel it into the meat grinder and then spew it out into your mouth. Once that runs out, because there's no more productivity and all the productive classes have fled or been purged or nationalized, Nepal will fall apart worse. I hope you realize that communists cannot manage an economy. There's a reason why people fear the idea of communism rising up in some Western state. Because it collapses. Look at what's happening to Venezuela. Stupid mistakes are made by central planners, and it destroys the economy down the road. Not a great day for Nepal, definitely. That's about all. Peace out.